So let's
I just
expand on that.
follow up on that.
Sure. I was gonna
Yeah.
say, let's expand on that. Let's just, why not have the conversation of just ripping off the Band-Aid? We know we're growing. You know we're growing, Mike. You've seen, as city council, you know what's projected for the area. Everybody can just look around and see we're growing. So why not just rip the Band-Aid off? Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, I was just saying, when we talk about the bonds, clearly, Mike has had experience doing, a bond request before and has kind of done that process. But I think there are lots of resources for that. I mean, House Bill 3 even kind of outlines, what some of the bond measures are and some of those cap rates on those two different pools of money. So I think there are ways to do the bonds, and I think there are ways to research that, and other school districts have done it. We've done it. So that is, I think, an aspect where, like Mike, let's say if I were to be elected, Mike would be a great resource. That doesn't mean we can't reach back to those that have some of that historical perspective and some of that experience as a resource, to kind of say, what is it that you can offer us? Because I think we really are successful as a district, as a person, as a leader, when we reach to our resources, right? So I think there are ways to look for those resources and understand those pools of money and how we do those bonds. And I do know that you can do bonds and not increase taxes. So there's way that we can do that. And I know that we just paid off 2 of our bonds a couple years early. So we're able to now kind of reappropriate some of those monies if we had to do another bond request, right? So I do have some understanding of what bonds are. They're kind of like a debt that we're paying back, with interest over time. So I do have some basic knowledge, but I think it is something that, with the interest and the passion that I have, to be able to get up to speed, use the resources, use people like Mike and others, that I don't think that would be any deficit to us being able to, as a board, successfully move forward.
So Mike, rip off the Band-Aid. Should we just talk about bonds and go
well,
ahead?
I think we're going to have to talk about bonds. I mean, I don't think that's what you're talking about is a bond election. This is different than city government. City government, you can do certain bonds without an election. In the district, you've got to do an election. Right. And so right. A big issue there becomes, how do you sell it? That's probably, a lot of time, effort, and work when we did our prior bond election went into how did we obtain enough input from stakeholders to make the decisions that we could sell this. And we do have some. The state limit on an INS tax is 50 cents for every $100. You cannot go over that. You can drag it out longer and do that, but that's as much as you can be. We're at about 28 right now, a little over 28 cents for that. Now you can refinance those bonds and sell them. There are a lot of ways to manipulate it. But Jeff, to your point, we have a reserve of about $11 million. The state requires that we keep enough money in reserve to operate the school system for 3 months. If you don't do that, then you get a letter from the state, from TA, that puts you on notice. Years ago, Kennedale got one of those. You don't really want to do that. So could we afford to spend our money, our reserves, and do some of these? Maybe so. I think what you get into, though, is in a climate, the board and the administration get very cautious about spending a reserve down too far, especially when you have other things like teachers' salaries and things like that really are problematic for us too. And you can't do a bond for those. So I think probably we're going to have to look at a bond. To me, the real issue, Jeff, is how much capacity do we need? And I'm not sure we've really drilled down on that. We have the 5 housing projects that are due now. They're fixing to sign a contract on the drag strip, from what I understand. Now, most of that will be in Mansfield, but if I'm not mistaken, it seemed like I'm remembering that we had a portion of that, a small portion, that also was in Kennedale. So my deal is, I really think we need to do our due diligence and look at what we need first, And then from that point, after we make some decisions about what we're going to need, then get stakeholder input, then try and sell it to the public. But my hunch is that probably, as they say, all roads are eventually going to lead to a bond election.
So there's one drastic option that nobody really, talks about because it's pretty drastic. So, what about redistricting? Like if you look at the city elections versus y'all's elections, there's a good 1,200 people difference sometimes. And so that's a lot of voters. That's a lot of bodies, basically a lot of students coming from that side, across on Arlington. So, I mean, is that even an option? Should that even be a discussion? Maria?
Well, that has come
Oh, go
up
ahead.
before, and I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know. We have seen districts that have been dissolved by the state. I don't know that I've never heard of a mechanism by which you take a portion of your district and basically turn them out. Now, there may be a mechanism to do that. I think there would be a significant pushback from our community on
Oh, of
that.
course. I think
But
we all would, I believe. But
I'm not aware of the legal mechanism by which you can do that. I mean, you can dissolve your district and be kind of assumed in another district, but I'm not aware of how you can just say, we don't want these folks, let's send them over here and we'll keep our city of Kennedale.
sure.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other options before we would get to any kind of like, that kind of option. I think like I said, we've already had some engineering look at how we can repurpose the buildings that we have.
Yeah.
Certainly another building is possible. Like you said, whether that's an administration building, whether that ends up being another elementary school building. I mean, if you think about it too, we have all of our schools on one side of Kennedale Parkway. What about, another building on the other side of Kennedale Parkway and what that might be doing to the neighborhoods and the communities over there. So I think we've got a lot of options that we can keep our diversity. We can keep our inclusivity of everyone who is kind of like picked Kennedale Independent School District for a purpose and for a reason. I think we've got a lot of other options, but I agree with Mike. I think it's something that we certainly need to be looking at strategically, right? We need a short-term game plan, long-term game plans, and definitely we're going to need stakeholder involvement and buy-in and input because it is going to affect everyone. It's going to affect the entire district and all the children. We obviously want the best. And so we've got a lot of factors to look at when we're looking at it. So it certainly needs to be something on the table with a lot of discussion, a lot of forethought, and a lot of planning.
Yeah.
But Jeff, I will tell you this, Maria and I would be happy to kind of go with the narrative that Jeff Navarez wants to kick the Arlington people out of Kennedale.
That's not what I was saying.
We're willing to get that out there.
I'm sure I'm going to get chewed out on it.
I'm not going with that, Mike. I'm not going with that. I think we need to keep everybody.
Well, I'm already been in Rotary. After you get voted in, then you can kind of join me on that.
But it's definitely like, the elephant in the room kind of conversation. Nobody really wants to bring it up. That's why I brought it up. Like, do we have to do something that drastic? Can this fixable? Because I kind of agree with, I think Mike was the one that brought this up about the land it's just hard to get right now, especially in big quantities. And although the district owns a good sized land just north of Kroger, it's the matter of positioning the buildings. I mean, you have Arthur, you have Delaney and the junior high within a half a mile of each other. I mean, it's just 3/4 of a mile. And so if you start moving things around, like taking Arthur back here, what do you make it? Like you're just kind of on top of each other. How do you, I think Chad said this to me before, how do you cut out Kennedale and Arlington to make sure that bus routes and people are getting to the right places? And so I think that's the biggest hurdle I think all of us are going to have to do moving forward is land, like where we can do this, we can do bonds, we can, fundraise, whatever we need to do, save money to do it. It's just where do we do it?
The other thing, Jeff, I think you've got to keep in mind is that everything affects everything else in school. So let's say, and I don't even know that this is legal again, but let's say you did decide to carve out some of Kennedale School District. You stop and think you're also losing a significant amount of revenue there.
Absolutely right.
64% of our school revenue comes from property taxes.
That's right.
And then again, you'd be losing some from your average daily attendance that you're getting. So it's a complicated issue. And certainly if we were kind of starting from scratch and designing a school district, we might do this a whole lot differently than it's done. But unfortunately, we're about 50 years down the road, 60 years down the road on that deal.
And that was a long process for the community in Kennedale back then. And there wasn't a high school for the longest time.
Oh, that's true.
It was up to
That's
10th
true.
grade. Yeah.
That's true. And don't even get them talking about the shades of green that were our school colors. That'll get you run out there.
I know. I hear it.
So I think the good news, just to close that out, is like you said, Jeff, we do have some property over by Kroger. We do have Arthur Intermediate has some space there, to build and to grow out. And then we can look also, like I said, on the other side of Kennedale Parkway. There's some property over there with some possibilities and potential. So I think we've got other options to be able to, like I said, continue the inclusivity, that we need the property taxes, the attendance numbers. I think we've got a great thing going on in the district. We just need to overcome this challenge of the growth, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think.
Well, and that's where I think we're all agreeing on this. We need to find it. Years ago, when we built the high school, we overbuilt the high school because our projections were wrong. It was that high school was going to fill up, and I think they had projected 4 years. Well, it didn't. Now it's good we've got it now. We can still use it.
Yes.
But we want to make sure that our projections are accurate and are meeting our needs, but we're not wasting money either. And I think there's a way to do that, but I don't think we're there yet.
Sure, and the projections were just wrong because the projections for our area was a lot sooner than what's been going on. It just kind of started the last 2 years, where it was supposed to start in 2011, and you know about that, Mike, how we were all prepping for this, and then it was like, we're here, and nobody showed up yet.
Let me add another thing. One of the big issues with the school district has been the numbers of kids we've had going into private school and charter schools.
Charter schools, and there's
that
a charter
has
school
been
that's going to start in Kennedale.
and there's some talk that there's going to be a charter school put on the other side of 287.
Yep, that's what I heard.
So I mean, that gets back into, we've got to have a school system that keeps our kids in it, and where parents are not wanting to take them out for charter school, private school to the extent, because that has hurt us.
Yeah, and I think it would be foolish. Our high school alone, our programs, they weren't even the programs that I did when I was in high school. That was the teach the test, teach the task scenario. But we have people graduating high school as certified nurses, or going to the police academy, with a leg up, or having 2 years of college in Texas. I mean, that's an amazing thing that we could. We have shop class and printing and multimedia. Yeah. We have just so many options that are trade school things that I just think it's foolish to even pull out.
I think you're exactly right.
Let's move on to the next question, and this goes back to you, Mike. What do you think KISD has done well, and what do they need to improve upon as it relates to diversity and inclusivity? There we go.
Okay. And that's kind of
I am an English
$1,000 question there. I think let me, and I'm not sure exactly what direction she was when she looked at that, but I'm going to take it from the end of racial diversity.
I take it that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and that depends a lot. I think our district, as we say, what are we doing well? What are we probably not doing so well? If you look at our numbers, we've been about 26% Hispanic, about 25%, 24% African American, about 4% Asian, about 43% Caucasian. So if we're looking at it that way, let's looking at our board of trustees. Well, we have 3 out of 7 who are African American. So from that standpoint, our African American representation is really good. Mm-hmm. However, we have no Hispanic representation on there. So you would say maybe not quite as well. If you go to our campus staff, we have 2 African American principals. Mm-hmm. We have 1 African American assistant principal, 1 Hispanic assistant principal, 3 African American counselors, 1 Hispanic nurse. So we're getting in kind of a mixed bag there. We're probably doing, again, better with our African American educators than we are with our Hispanic educators. I think as you look at teachers, we don't do near as good as we're doing with our other staff there. I think we're still looking at predominantly, a heavy Caucasian group of teachers, and I think the deal there is, I mean, and Maria probably is well aware of, there's a lot of research out there that says matching teacher and student ethnicity leads to better outcomes in things.
Mhm.
It's interesting, we had a Kennedale resident who is a doctor with the Southwestern Medical School, took part in a documentary called Black Men in White Coats. And he made his name was Dr. Curtis Moore. Matter of fact, my daughter, I think they purchased his house from he and his wife. But very, good. He made a very important point that supportive parents, he said, were the biggest thing he felt like into achieving. But he said right after that came seeing someone they could relate to, that you could relate to.
Sure.
I think now to give our school its props, I think we've tried to go out and hire a more diverse faculty. I think we've run into two problems. One problem is our local universities tend to be partnered with our bigger competitive districts around us.
Sure.
And two, our salaries are much less than they are. So we get hit with the salary issue. Many of our male teachers want to go into coaching. Our coaching stipends are just terrible. I think probably we need to look at expanding our recruiting. As I mentioned a little earlier, I'm on a board of trustees in Oklahoma. They have some very fine schools of education there. I think Corey, our principal at Patterson, graduated from OU.
Mm-hmm.
We may need to reach out to some of those schools. I mean, the Kennedale, Tarrant County area is a very attractive place for people up there to look at moving. And so I think, that's one positive. The other thing, quite frankly, is Oklahoma teacher pay is horrible. It's worse than Kennedale teacher pay. So, I mean, recruiting some of those teachers, I think we really need to look, though, at what we need to be doing to recruit more. We lost a very good Hispanic principal to Arlington, and the principals are being paid $15,000, $20,000 more. I mean, my goodness, it's hard to keep good people. So I think that's one big issue. I think another thing we could do is we could tend to partner a little bit more with some diverse districts and play off how they're making it work better. I know we partner some with Mansfield. Nothing wrong with Mansfield, but it's probably not the most diverse district in the world when we're talking about racial diversity. You take a look at HEB, which is one of the most diverse districts in Texas. Maybe we need to kind of look at trying to partner with them and partner off of some of the things that are working for them in handling a diverse population. And I guess the last thing is, and this is never very popular, but as a psychologist, I'm required to do some diversity training to get my license renewed.
Sure.
I think they're probably, that could be something that be looked at a little bit more too. I know we did some diversity training a year or so ago here in Kennedale, but it wasn't set up as a regular thing. Probably would not hurt all of our teachers and all of our staff to kind of go through some of that from time to time.
Maria?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Mike just talked about. I think those are really good jumping off points to start with. When I kind of thought of this question, I was looking at a few things. I was looking at our achievement gaps. I was looking at some of the disciplinary disparity. I was looking for our verbiage when we're talking about our mission and vision of every student, all students. There's been a lot of discussion about, do we really mean every student, all students? And I was looking at some of the culture of bullying. If you looked at some of the survey results from students and parents, there was some concern about a culture of bullying. So that's even in one of our district plans to kind of address that. So when I thought about those and looked at those, I thought of, some individual pocket areas of what we have done well or when we've done better, like Mike said. Certainly when you look at the diversity on the school board, right? We're doing some different recruitments with going to some of the HBCUs, right? And doing some recruitment there. I had a high schooler come mention to me that they found an assignment that was pretty offensive to them, and they asked for a modified assignment, and the teacher immediately gave it. So there's certainly some things that I think we're doing with a sense of awareness. But kind of what I was thinking about is thinking even bigger and thinking even bolder than that. And kind of, again, working off of what Mike said, what are best practices? What are some other districts kind of looking at and doing that's really working for them to help, again, address those, close the achievement gaps, look at the disparity in discipline, all students, inclusivity. And so there really are equity programs out there, equity ways of looking at things, everything that the school district is doing through the lens of equity. And really that just means kind of mitigating barriers, even the playing field for all students. We're talking racial, yes, but we're also talking socioeconomic. We're talking different backgrounds and culture. We're talking about whether you're a GT student or learning differences. We're talking about the concept of bullying again, just really kind of having a culture, an overarching culture of equity. And the way that we can kind of do that again is, wouldn't that be very powerful for the district to kind of create that culture and take a stand and have an assessment? I mean, the way that you kind of get to that point where best practices, like I said, other districts are doing, is you have an assessment that looks at some things that are sort of like, town halls and interviews, but also looking at your hiring practices, your promotions, your salaries, your policies, your procedures, your curriculum, all again, sort of through the lens, if you will, of equity. And if you're making that kind of cultural shift, you are really then, research is showing that leveling the playing field not only does a lot of things what Mike was addressing, that is a district that will attract teachers, retain teachers. Who doesn't want to work in sort of in an environment that is really not just tolerant? We're not talking about we're talking about appreciating, valuing, edifying all the students and having a voice for all the students. And again, research is showing that sort of overarching lens and the way that you operate and make individual decisions on a daily basis really then addresses a lot of the achievement gaps, disciplinary issues, bullying. It just makes for a different culture where students can really be set up for success. So doing that one thing, which is a big task, it's looking at things and having a review and coming up with strategic plans of what we can address how we can address those things. We could put a cultural diversity director in place. Other districts have done that. They have a position at the central office or the administration office that really kind of oversees some of this and is there for that guidance and that direction for the district. So there's things like that we could do that would be a short-term, long-term process, ongoing process, but I think would really do a lot to address a lot of the issues that we're seeing and just move us to another plateau.
So do either of you think that there's an issue? Like, I'm not even talking about minor, like, yeah, there's an issue. We need to do something about this kind of scenario.
I think, again, when you look at it from what I just said, do we have achievement gaps? Yes, we do. Do we have, an issue? There's certainly a perception on some of the surveys that there's an issue with bullying. Do we have a retention issue? Are we looking for ways to recruit? Best practices show that equity really can address a lot of those. And also, Jeff, to kind of answer that, a lot of times we don't know what we don't know, right? So there's always going to be.
I have spies. They're called kids. I get, and it's rough, but I mean.
So we do all have our own biases, and Mike said, I mean, that's why a lot of professions, teachers included, school districts included, we have, cultural diversity. We're looking at those sort of unintended, biases that we come to the table. And I think a lot of those can impede learning and success in ways we don't even realize or understand. And again, it is very best practices to address a lot of those things. So do we have this horrific issue? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that in any disparaging way. I'm saying that what we have, that it's good. We always want to make better. and we want our better to be our very best.
Sure.
And so if we look at things through this lens of equity and how we can level the playing field and make the culture and the environment conducive where we're edifying everyone and giving everyone the opportunity, and then I think that would address a lot of the things that we do have going on. But like I said, there's a lot of good things we're doing. You know, we just had a coach who put 4 girls on technically an all boys soccer team because they were the best players, right? So there's a lot of things being done on an individual small scale basis. But I think if we had sort of a person in place and a way that we kind of operated and looked at things, I think that would be best practices for our district. And again, neighboring districts are doing it. So I like Mike's idea of let's partner, let's see what they're doing. And this is some of what they're doing.
Well, I think Maria, you make a good point. You never putting in best practices, and we would have to decide what that is for Kennedale, but
Right.
putting in best practices before there's a major problem is always better than waiting for there to be a major problem and then trying to correct it with better or best practices. So best practices are always a good plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're basically saying just let's just go ahead and do it, just kick it in the bud before it even becomes an issue.
That's all right, Jeff. We already know you're trying to kick the Arlington kids out of Kennedale.
And here I am talking about inclusivity and
That's
equity.
right.
Come
That's
on.
This is so racist. We've been accused of that. So
I know what's going to some things are going to be edited out of this, Maria. I mean,
no, we don't. This is straight through.
Go
Everybody
raw,
gets the whole
Jeff. Go
thing.
raw. We want it all in here. But I think again, Jeff, I think and to Mike's comment, it is addressing something before it gets to a level of having to kind of do fixing, right? Which can just cause a lot of harm in a community, right? And a lot of division and harm in a community. And you certainly don't want to get there. But I think it also can address some of what we already know is there. Closing those achievement gaps, looking at the discipline disparity, looking at some of the bullying there was at least a perception of that. And just, you know, increasing and all student success. And again, taking what we're talking about in our vision and mission and vision committees, right? All students, every student. Yeah, exactly. So am I. So that's a way to kind of really look at this. And again, the research is out there, best practices are out there, other neighboring districts are out there. So wouldn't it be powerful for our district to get on that and get ahead of the curve and really be the trendsetters in that?
Yeah, and as a parent, it's just hard for me to say, you know, we have an issue because I've gone through the whole system a couple times over. I still got a couple more left, and I just never had an issue. You know, it's been pretty diverse, and
Right.
you know, talking to Faith of what the kids have to go through, it's pretty inclusive too, more so than when I was growing up for sure.
Right.
But no, I'm not saying there's not problems, and of course there's administrative things that come up and that I'll never know about. But it's just hard for me, you know, and I guess that comes from being an Army brat, right? When you're an Army brat overseas, as long as you're American, who cares who you were? So, but I think Mike's, you know, hit it on the head. Like, let's just go ahead and do it. There's going to be plenty of money coming from the federal government to do these types of things, anyways, and the state government's also doing it as well currently right now with a Rotarian who's got a program set up for this for businesses. So I know there's going to be money thrown around. Why not? Let's just, you know, keep everybody up to date, make sure everybody's on the same page, but just so that everybody understands what the rules are, I guess, nowadays, you know, and not just guessing what the rules are. I think that's where probably it would be best put forward for all of us.
Right. And I think some of it is, you know, heart work. You know, some of it is looking at the policies and procedures, but some of it is heart work too. You know, like you said, we don't know what we don't know. Right. So there is a way to kind of, you know, to be able to look at this and then kind of say, well, from looking at it from a different perspective or a different lens of equity, an equity lens, what are some things that maybe we could improve on? You know, again, not saying it in any disparaging way, but just that, you know, what can we do better? We always want to
be the best of what we are, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if we're at the best at what we are and we address it from this perspective and make sure that all of our students and every student is successful, then again, people won't be leaving to charter schools,
Sure.
right? I mean, there's always going to be a niche for charter schools, since we mentioned that, right? There's always going to be male leadership academies, female leadership academies. There's always going to be Christian school. There's always going to be homeschool, right? We don't want to compete with all those niches. We just need to be the very best public schools so that we can be a destination school, a choice school for public education. And I think this is one of the ways that kind of gets us out there in the cutting edge.
Couldn't agree more.